Today's show is brought to you by HomebrewSupply.com. Homebrew Supply is your one-stop shop for brew day ingredients, recipes, equipment, and more. Take advantage of everyday low pricing and everyday flat rate shipping only at HomebrewSupply.com. Go to HomebrewSupply.com right now and use our promo code HHH to get 5% off your order. HomebrewSupply.com. Let us help make your brew day better.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Pearl Media Network.
I can't do anything right. Hi, guys. Welcome to the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions, and we discuss all things related to craft beer. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can go to homebrewhappyhour.com and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page, or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. I am your host, Joshua Stubing. Today, we have a special guest, like you heard at the top of the show. Mr. Horst Dornbusch is back. He told me not to, you reminded me, not Mr. Dornbusch, but I can say Mr. Horst Dornbusch. Is that acceptable?
If you want to make it complicated, go ahead.
Yeah, he likes to complicate things.
I do, as seen in the intro of the show. As seen in the intro of the show. Horst, we really do appreciate you coming back. First off, has your fame just blown up since you were on our show the first time? Have you been getting nonstop emails, new book deals? How's life been since we had you on our show?
I used to be just infamous, and since then, I had to drop the IN, and I'm now famous thanks to you guys.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Well, joke's on you. I don't know the definition of the words.
As a foreigner, as a previous foreigner, I guess I'm a dual citizen, as you know.
Yes.
I had to learn English properly, and that is something that separates me from a lot of Americans.
Yeah, right. They don't know. I agree with that remark. I probably resemble it a little bit.
I might resemble that remark. I won't butter you up too much because we've already done that in the emails back and forth. But the episode we did with you, episode 199, happens to be one of our most consumed episodes of 2020. Tons of great feedback. People loved having you, or loved hearing your insight on the show. Your alt beer recipe has been very well received. We get a lot of feedback from Patreon members who receive that. So we want to, again, thank you for doing that, and thank you for coming back on the show. Todd was actually the lead on organizing your return. I think he immediately reached out to you and said, Horst, would you do the show again? And you said, my people will talk to your people. But Todd, for this episode, like we talked at the beginning, it has a lot of stuff I have no idea about at all. And these topics are not they're ranging, and they're broad. So I don't want to take up too much time in small talk, which is like a rare oddity in this show. So we're going to jump right into content. Todd, I don't even know what you want to talk about.
Well, one of the things we're going to talk about is the Landraces in hops and barley. And I'll be the first to admit, I did not know the definition of Landrace when this started, and I'm still not 100% sure. I've actually emailed Horst several times and told him what I thought my definition was, and he kept saying 9. So why don't we let the expert give us a definition and kind of let us know why this is important and what's happening with hops and barley in Europe and probably other places in the world.
Well, when it comes to agricultural raw materials for brewing, at the very beginning, right after the Neolithic Revolution, about 12,000 years ago, there were only landraces. That is stuff that grew quite naturally. And then as humans started to practice agriculture, they started to select the best seeds or the best plants and replanted them, and that was the beginning of cultivation. So the original modification of what grew in nature was through selection, deliberate human selection and it was based on the purposes for which we wanted to use the plant. And of course, in beer making, you want to have a nice plump kernel, and you want to make tasty beer with it. So that is how you gradually improved your barley strain. And of course, every barley in the world was different depending on the terroir. In other words, the soil condition, the exposure to the sun, the amount of sunlight, the temperature, how much frost you got, how long the vernalization period, that is the winter sleep, is for the plant. In some places you get spring early, in some places it comes much later, and so on. So there were already a great number of varieties in the world, in any genus and family and so on. But it was human interference through selection that created separate strains. That prevailed for millennia, actually until the 18th century. And it was in the late 18th century that people learned how to crossbreed. That is, not to select, but you take the pollen from one plant and insert it into the stamen of another plant. Thus, you created a new variety, and that new variety was a genetic combination. And in those days, they didn't know what genes were. But now we know there was a genetic combination of daddy and mama. That was a new plant, okay? That new plant was no longer a landrace. That's when landraces, they didn't stop because we continued to grow landraces. And some of the landraces that existed until the middle and end of the 19th century are now being reclaimed. There are seed banks that have maintained seeds from those early days of crossbreeding. And for instance, in England, Chevalier, the malt Chevalier, which was discovered in 1820 by a parson in England, and within about 50, 60 years, it was the foundation grain for 90% of all British ales. So all the pale ales and IPAs and all that, the stouts and all that, they were all based on the Chevalier barley. That barley was very tasty, but agronomically very inefficient. Thus, by 1910, 1920, people had crossbred new varieties which replaced the old landrace. And these new varieties were 10, 15, 20%, today about 25 to 30% more efficient in terms of yield, disease resistance, and so on. So the old landraces, they fell sort of into the background. They receded into the background. And nowadays, with our modern genetic marker breeding, we can now combine the genes not of mama and papa, but of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different plants through one act into a new plant. That's not genetic modification. It's not GMO, because GMO means you're creating something that nature could not possibly have created. In other words, if you cross a goose with a zebra, that's something that nature would never have done. But we could do that genetically nowadays. So that's a genetically modified organism, engineered organism. But the transition from landrace to cultivated varieties occurred as people started to do crossbreeding, and now we do this via genetic manipulation, marker defined combinations. In other words, we can tell if plumpness in barley, on which gene that quality is located. So we could take a barley that is winter hardy from Scotland, take Golden Promise. We take genes from Golden Promise and combine them with a different barley that has more enzymes or something like that. But you take, let's say, you can crossbreed a barley like Hanna, a landrace from Moravia, which is the one that was used in the very first Pilsner in 1842. That was the Hanna Eco-Agro race of Shetland. You can take that and cross it with the British Chevalier Landrace, and the two would normally never meet, but we have transportation, so we can create something that nature could have hypothetically created, but practically probably wouldn't. So that is a cultivated race rather than a land race. And you can do that in hops as well. When we talk about land races in Central Europe, in the hop department, there are very few, very, very few. You have Saaz from Moravia, grown in near Schatteck. That's a land race. You have Hallertauer Mittelfrüh, which is a land race. Hersbrucker, which is related genetically to Saaz, it's a land race in Germany. Spalter. So you got Saaz. In Germany, you got Mittelfrüh, Spalter, Hersbrucker, and Tettnanger. Tettnanger is also genetically related to Saaz. So that may have been the result of migration of the plant, natural migration, and then adaptation to new terroirs. Alsace has Strüsselspalt, which is a land race. It's also related to Saaz. So only Mittelfrüh is not related to Saaz. And those are your European land races in hops. That's it. Period.
Wow.
The end.
Yeah.
And I think we brewed with just about every one.
Yeah.
Right.
Indian, Golding, Fuggle, these are land races.
Okay.
Now you can crossbreed them, and you can make Magnum out of let's say you can take a breed like a North American wild hops, Neo-Mexicanos or Pubescens or something like that, and you can take the genes and insert them into Hallertauer hops. And then nature could do this hypothetically, but not practically because of the great distance. So, but it's still a natural product. It's not genetically modified or engineered. So, in other words, a land race is an organism that has no genes other than its own. That sounds weird,
Right.
but a cultivated plant is not selected, but it's created, it's bred by us. It has as source material, genetic source material, genes from more than one plant. In other words, not just itself, but half of the genes of, let's say, Chevalier, the British barley, and half of the genes of Kneifel from Silesia. If you combine these two plants, they each give, let's say, half of their gene sets to the new plant. So you look at that new plant and you analyze it, you can see that it has, its origin is two separate gene sets. Do you see how that works?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's actually...
What we now breed are thoroughbred barley varieties that are disease resistant. They're specialized. Some of them grow well, let's say, at the northern reach of the Adriatic Sea, where you get a lot of fog. There are some barley varieties. By the way, all 6-row barley varieties are created by us. There are no 6-row barley varieties in nature.
I did not know
I
that.
did not know that either.
Yep.
Huh.
They're all, originally they were all 2-row, all of them. Okay, so we can fiddle with that stuff to get, if you wish, mutations nature can do mutations. That means it's the same, it's its own gene set, but something dropped out of it or got screwed up. Mm-hmm. That is one way of changing, and nature mutates all the time. And then it's that old survival of the fittest rule, where if nature creates in one terroir 5 different mutations, eventually only one will survive, namely the strongest, and that could actually be the original plant. You could have hundreds of mutations and they're all deficient, so they all fade away and don't reproduce. They lose out in the struggle for nutrient survival or whatever. Got it? So that's the real distinction.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I did not realize that. I did not realize there were still plants or hops grains that were exactly the same as they were originally. I assumed pretty much everything had been modified to some extent, but with these land races, they're the same way they were 1,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago.
The modern land races are still the old land races.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Can we real quick? Can we go back to the goose and the zebra? Like, I think we overpassed that way too fast. You're saying that's not possible. Is that what you're saying, Horst?
No, he said it would be possible if you modified it.
Okay, that's the GMO.
Genetically GMO.
I could not stop focusing on. No, kidding aside, the landrace thing that blow like
if you cross a monkey with a zebra, nature wouldn't do that. That is genetically.
No, I'm sorry.
Or if you go in and you really alter the genetic structure so that the plant becomes not very tasty for birds who might feed on it.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that we can do that nature wouldn't do. I know the distinction sounds might actually include sort of a gray zone where we could debate if that's a modified organism or one that nature could have created, at least in theory.
right.
Okay.
Right.
So, Horst, would you say that all the landrace hops are noble hops? Is that where they got the term?
The term noble hops is one that was invented for marketing purposes in the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
It's not really, strictly speaking, a biological term. And what it really denotes, it means really, originally it was used just for the 4 German land races.
Okay.
And eventually Saaz and Strisselspalt, the Alsatian Strisselspalt and the Czech Saaz were included in the nobility category.
Right.
And it really means that the ratio between alpha acids and beta acids is roughly 1-to-1, whereas in most other hop varieties, there are many more alpha acids than beta acids. The other characteristic is that noble hops have a relatively large amount of total oils, and often within the selection of noble oils, farnesene and caryophyllene tend to be unusually high. In other words, it's very rare that a hop variety has 15% that has a farnesene content of, let's say, 50% of total oil, whereby total oil is measured as milliliters per 100 grams. That's the standard international unit we use. So 15% of those oils as farnesene is extremely rare. Linalool is usually close to zero, but if it goes up to maybe 3% or something like that, you're getting into the noble range. And linalool, for instance, is one where we have an extremely low taste threshold. So linalool we associate with hoppiness, just the way we would associate malic acid primarily with grapes or oxalic acid with rhubarb, for instance. So, or acetaldehyde with green apples, and so on. So the characteristic hoppiness is often associated with a relatively high levels of linalool. So, and that kind of vague definition I gave you is sort of the foundation of noble hops. And for instance, the Slovenian, what is it called? Come on. Styrian Golding. It is not considered a noble hops, even though it is a transplanted pure land race. It's actually a Slovenian adaptation of Fuggle.
Okay, well.
So, and Fuggle is a land race. So that Slovenian one, you can argue, is a land race, but at least as the term noble evolved, it was not really included in it. But nowadays, people also include in there are different people in ordinary parlance apply the term perhaps with less precision than I outline it right now.
I see.
Wow.
Oh, I was about to ask who even makes up that rule. Like who
The noble thing, marketing people.
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's just marketing. I like that subjectivity.
Absolutely.
The same people that came up with Oktoberfest, I guess.
So one of the things you mentioned in our discussions in the past was that some of these varieties are possibly in danger now because of some climate change situations.
Correct. To give you an idea, it's let me see if I can get that together. It's a viroid. It is a citrus crack bark viroid. That's a virus type disease that thrives in orange groves, for instance, in Israel. Because of climate change, it moved north. It was first discovered in hop gardens in Slovenia maybe 5-10 years ago. It has since invaded the hop gardens of Germany. And it basically destroys, if it infests a hop garden, a particular hop garden, it just destroys the crop. You're done for. And it's very hard to eradicate. So what the people in the Hop Research Center, the German Hop Research Center in Hüll, in the Hallertau, it's a tiny village. It's basically the center and 2 buildings around it. That's the village. They're about, I guess, 40, 50 employees there. They are now breeding, not genetically modifying, but crossbreeding new varieties that they then test. They have what they call a hop kindergarten, where they grow them in greenhouses, like 14,000 plants, and then they select the best plants out of the greenhouse, try them outside, and so on. And that what they're trying to do is breed new varieties, hop varieties, that are resistant to that particular pathogen, verticillium wilt, certain root lice, all kinds of stuff. They're now moving north. Some of the pathogens, for instance, in German barley fields, can now be found in Finland. In the old days, it was much too cold for them in Finland. And some pathogens that used to be at home in Italy can now be found in German barley fields. So what the plant breeders do, like Brewing in Herzogenaurach in Bavaria is one of them, Ackermann, I forgot where they're located in the north of Germany. They are now breeding new varieties that can be planted in Germany, but they're disease resistant to pathogens that actually are at home in Italy. So, and if you don't do that, and if you don't do that with the hop landraces, which are ancient, all of a sudden you lose all your Herzbrucker, all your Mittelfrüh, all your Tettnanger, they're all gone. Kaputski, Spalt, Saaz, gone. What, in order to preserve them, what the breeders now do, or Strüsselspalt, you're going to run out of it. It can't grow anymore in its terroir. And if you move it, you can't just take the Hallertau and move it into Sweden. That doesn't work because you have the wrong soil condition, the wrong exposure to the sun. It's a different terroir, right? These plants develop in a terroir-specific manner so that they can thrive. So we have recipes based on Hallertau or Mittelfrüh or Magnum or whatever, Taurus, whatever you're using, or Isken Golding, Fuggle. You have nice recipes, and you are just, quote, just home brewers, right? I mean,
Right.
You're doing anything. But if you're a company, a brewery, that is a 50 million a year company. If your raw materials are no longer available and you have to do substitution, your product changes, maybe you lose your business.
Yeah.
So what these breeders are trying to do, they take the marker specific genes that create the properties that we like, and they try to preserve them while also taking genetic properties from other plants that happen to be louse resistant, wilt resistant, pleonospora, all kinds of critters, viruses, and other spiders. What is it? Spotted spiders and all, spider mites, all kinds of stuff. So plants develop resistances against their locally specific pests.
Right.
And if the climate changes, which is happening right now, Germany is getting much drier and much warmer in the summer. So it can wipe out the hop harvest. Thus, they're frantically trying to breed new varieties. It has already, they have succeeded with Spalter. You can get the Spalter replacement is Diamant. The Tettnang replacement, I think, is Aurum. Perle is going to be replaced. And often I happen to know this stuff because I'm the guy who gets the first shot at brewing with these.
Nice.
Oh, very cool.
with these new test varieties here in North America. They want to see how they fare in our brew systems, because we often have like thick mash, non-decoction systems, for instance, whereas in Germany they usually have decoction systems. So they like it when I go around and play with large and small systems with their new varieties do brew tests before they sending them to, before they're cultivated on a large scale and then sent to the market for real brewers.
Oh, I could see how that would be a disaster if you decide this is the perfect new variety, and you produce a lot of it and it works well in Germany, and then they bring it to the United States and it doesn't work. It would be a disaster, right? So you're able to brew more like we would brew it here and make sure that it's going to work in both locations then.
It has happened with a couple of hop varieties where the farmers then, the hop growers, adopted the varieties and hoped that they would play well in the North American market. And so they harvested the first big batch and they sat on it. And, there's the hop storage index, so you lose hop oxidizes and all that. It doesn't last all that long. So they had to take out the plants and, change the plants in the hop gardens. And usually it takes 3 years before they are really productive. So a farmer can lose a lot of money for a lot of years if they grow new hops that then don't find the market. So it's there are millions and millions and millions of euros involved in that, or dollars, whatever, pounds, or also in the United States. It's the Oregon, the USDA operation in Oregon, and the research operations, the breeding operations in Yakima Valley. They all do the same thing.
Okay.
That's super interesting to me that because we have to adapt right now, correct? I mean, that's as much little control as us and our industry might have over overall climate change. What we can do is adapt in the biotechnology realm, I guess, in this hybridization and crossbreeding, whatnot, to try to make these similar plants viable for future generations. That's the goal. Yeah.
Well, I do a lot of gardening, and one of the things that I find is I love to use heirloom seeds and grow these old plants, these old tomatoes and old squash and that sort of thing. But a lot of times it doesn't work out that well. The production is extremely low. Sometimes they may not last very long. So there's just a lot of reasons that some of these varieties have been changed because they tend to work better. However, a lot of times the reason they change them is to make them last longer on the in the supply chain. And when you do find a variety of an heirloom that is very, very tasty, you just can't get a tomato like that anywhere else. You can't buy it in the grocery store because it wouldn't last. And it's something that you have to grow at home. So I guess that's not completely dissimilar to what's happened here, huh?
Well, one of the problems with barley, if you want to call it that, is that until very recently, the primary focus has been agronomic. In other words, you grow high yield barley, so you get a few more metric tons per acre into the bin. The farmer is perhaps less interested in producing a variety that has a great malty taste, that has great processing capabilities or properties in the malting plant and in the brewery. A variety we like, varieties, barleys that are plump. That means 90 to 95% of the kernels have a diameter of 2.5 millimeters or more. That's what we consider plump in the brewing industry. And if you have uniform plumpness, the processing in the malting plant and the settings in your mill, all of that can be maximized. If you have large and small kernels, your grist can be too fine or too coarse, depending on how you set it. If you need to mill tiny kernels next to big ones, then chances are the big ones get ground up too fine, and you get a fine grist and a stuck mash, lower extract efficiency, maybe more phenolics because you're beating up the husks and all that good stuff. So it's very important. In other words, the farmer, the maltster, and the brewer, they may look for, and also the consumer, because when you drink a beer, you want it to be tasty, right? So if you wish, the stakeholders in that chain, all of them may have slightly different, a slightly different focus with respect to the value of that same raw material. And I think what's happening now is that maltsters and brewers are starting to have a greater input into what farmers grow, and that's primarily because the processors, the maltsters and the hop processors, they're dealing with us guys, with brewers, and they know that sophisticated brewers, they say, go get lost. Yeah. And so they turn around and tell the farmers that maybe it's better to grow something else. And the effect is that the raw material then becomes slightly more expensive if your production value drops by 25%.
Yeah.
Barca is a typical example of a very malty, wonderful barley variety. It makes great malt, but the yield is 25% less, or maybe 15%, depending on where you grow it. Thus, the farmer has to charge 15 to 20% more when he or she delivers it to the maltster, which means they pass that price on. So when you buy a Barca malt, which is wonderful, it has to cost more than something based on Harrington or Klagers or whatnot.
And also, like a Barca malt is actually less efficient possibly when you brew with it, so that increases the cost even more. So you get less yield and you get less efficiency in the brewing process.
And more added cost.
It's the process that is not related to the variety. In other words, if you roast it more and all that. So that is a process variable in the malting plant. Mm-hmm. But I'm now talking even before you get to the malting plant.
Right, yeah.
Different barleys have different ultimate taste characteristics that are carried from the field to the glass. And if you have a malt or a barley that produces an indifferent tasting malt, but has a high yield, let's say 150% of what we are accustomed to, the farmer can make more money by harvesting less on the same plot, harvesting more on the same plot. But maybe that doesn't make the greatest beer. And that's where maybe there's the antagonism in terms of the interest that that the different parties to the value chain bring to the same product.
Okay. Well, that's it's pretty fascinating, really.
Yeah.
I think I learned a lot from talking to you, and I think I've learned even more on this podcast. So we really appreciate you kind of going through that.
Yeah, y'all's email chain back and forth.
I know. Yeah,
So much information.
it was a lot of information. Josh primarily likes to kind of just read the first few sentences and then skim down. It was hard for him to do
I'm
that.
telling you, if you would have started with the goose and
taped
zebra.
it, right? You taped it, so you are listening to the first 2 minutes, and then you fast forward to the last 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, so what says well with this show, I zone out till I'm editing it. I don't know what's going on, and I don't really even edit the show. Easiest job in the world. No, Todd's giving me a hard time because sometimes I'll ask a question and he'll say it was in the email. I say no, it wasn't. And he'll go, you want to bet $5? I'm like, wait, let me read the email.
I'll read the email and it's right there, because it wasn't in the first two sentences. So, well, I guess the other thing we were going to try to talk about today, which is something that we've talked about on this show before, and boy, what a big surprise. We were possibly wrong in some of our beliefs, answers. And that has to do with Marzen, Festbier.
Marzen.
Yeah. Okay. Now we could. How much time do we have left?
As much time as you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, no. With you, people actually, believe it or not, Horst, they ask for longer shows. We used to be a half-hour show, then we changed to right at an hour, and we still have people saying you should do 2 episodes a week. Or so. No, don't hold back. You please, whatever information.
It's your time.
It's your time. Yeah.
All right. This time, I'm not going to go back to the Neolithic Revolution. Okay. So we're in Bavaria. Let's call it the Middle Ages. You brew all year, but Bavaria, sort of the area around Munich, has a continental climate, which means it gets bloody cold in the winter, ice cold, and it gets extremely hot in the summer. And the problem with a wonderful summer and beer making is it doesn't stay very cold in the tanks, and there are a lot of ambient microbes. They didn't know microbiology in the Middle Ages, of course, but so the beers got infected in the summer in Munich. And because those Bavarians really love their beer, anything is related to beer is also a political matter. And I try not to talk about politics when I talk about beer, but you have to this time. So the Duke of Bavaria, one of them, it was Ludwig Wilhelm IV. He passed an edict that says, thou shalt use only hops, water, and barley. That is considered the forerunner of the Reinheitsgebot, the purity law, right? And they didn't know anything about yeasties in those days. And the Duke thought that would clean up the thing, because in those days, brewers put in all kinds of junk into their brew to cover up the bad flavor. Bark, soot, oxen bile, anything. Poisonous mushrooms. Oh, yeah, man, they, rushes, anything, man. Chicken blood, they did it. So the Duke cleaned up the beer, but it still tasted rotten in the summer often. His son, Albrecht V, 1553, he had an epiphany. He realized that beer tastes great in the winter and not in the summer. We know the microbes go dormant when it's minus 20 degrees, whatever, right?
Right.
So he issued a new decree, the so-called Sommerbrauverbot, the summer brewing prohibition. And he permitted brewers to brew only between September 29th and April 23rd.
Interesting.
No beer and brewing in the summer, except for wheat beer, but that's another story some other time. So the brewers brewed a ton of beer during the months of March. They brewed it slightly stronger They put it into casks, rolled it into cellars, into caves, because in April they had to stop. That was called March beer, or in German, Marzen beer, because März or Marzen is the month of March. So that stuff had to last until the end of the summer. But they could brew again after the next barley and hop harvest. And if there were still a few casks around from the previous batch, they had to drink it fast. We are now in October, so they have a harvest celebration. Call it an Oktoberfest.
All right.
Them Germans are very straightforward people.
Yeah.
So, in October, you finish your Marzen beer. How is that? Okay, so that was the effect of the summer brewing prohibition. Now, the beer was dark because of the direct fired kilns. It was dark and smoky. It looked like a Bamberger Rauchbier. Until roughly the mid-1500s, it was an ale. After that, it became a lager because of some other genetic stuff that we can discuss some other time. Yeast evolved out of ale yeast, became lager yeast because of hybridization and all that good stuff. That's a different story. All right. So now we know the origin of a Marzen beer. In 1810, and I got the piece of paper here, on October 12, 1810, the Bavarian Crown Prince Ludwig, later to become King Ludwig II, the first of Bavaria, he married Princess Theresa of Saxony-Hildburghausen. The nuptials were celebrated with a feast or a Volksfest. All right? That was October 12, 1810. No beer. It was something for the ordinary unwashed masses. Horse racing, all kinds of stuff, jugglers, whatever. Okay? And that was a very popular thing. There were about 40,000 people who came to that sort of celebration of the royal nuptials. It was so much fun, they decided to do it again the following year. Still no beer. The first reference, and then they started doing it every year, sort of to commemorate that bloody wedding. And the first reference to beer at the Oktoberfest, the Oktoberfest, dates to 1814. The German poet Achim von Arnim wrote about beer tents at the Oktoberfest. That was the introduction of beer. Obviously, the Marzen beer might have been served at the Oktoberfest, or they probably served the first batch of fresh beer at the Oktoberfest, which would have been what we now call a Dunkel, because that was the standard Bavarian beer in those days. So the first beer drunk at the first Oktoberfest was probably a Dunkel. Now, the Brits, it gets funny now. Advanced malting techniques in the 1830s and 1840s. They created the indirect fired kiln. So you no longer lit a smoky fire under the malt, but you heated air. You got a steam engine with a blower, and you sent clean hot air through the malt to dry it, to kiln it. So the malt all of a sudden became pale and non-smoky. A fellow called Gabriel Sedelmeier, the owner of the Spaten Brewery, and his friend Anton Dreher, the owner of the Dreher Brewery in Neuschwechat near Wien. They were friends. They went to Britain to take a look at all that. They went home and copied it. And they started to produce the first relatively pale malts in Vienna and in Munich. In Vienna, that beer was called Vienna Lager. Gabriel Sedelmeier produced his beer, and that was the first time that the word Marzen beer appeared on the label. The year is 1841. 1 year before the first Pilsner Urquell beer was brewed in the Czech Republic in Pilsen. That was the beginning of the Marzen beer and the Vienna lager. All right?
Yep.
So, that Marzen beer became a real March beer in 1871, at which point the Spaten Brewery started to call that beer Oktoberfest beer.
Oh, wow.
1871. So an Oktoberfest beer is really a well-aged Marzen, because by that time, exactly 300 years after the passage of the summer brewing prohibition, the summer brewing prohibition in Bavaria was rescinded exactly in 1853. So all of a sudden, people could brew in the summer again. And this time, they cooled their beer in cellars by having ice gallows. They sprayed water on sort of scaffolding and knocked the icicles off. And they also went to the lakes and they cut blocks of ice from the lakes, put them in the cellar so they cooled their beers that way. So they could brew in the summer again. And in 1872, the first refrigerator was invented by Carl von Linde, and he was financed by Spaten. And the first use of refrigeration was in the lagering tanks of the Spaten brewery. All right, so you can see how that worked. All of a sudden, brewers could work in the summer, and their Marzen beer could be drunk during the summer. But if you really age it until the celebration of the 1810 nuptials, then that became an Oktoberfest. So a Marzen beer and an Oktoberfest beer are the same thing, only the Oktoberfest beer is aged for 6 months, and the Marzen is probably aged for maybe 2 or 3 months. Next, here is the trick, and I have to look this up. When did that happen? I wrote that down. I took notes. When did the garbage start here? Let me see.
My wife calls that our anniversary. It was December 15th.
What happened was the where is that?
Well, I had no idea that Germans in Munich invented refrigeration. That's fascinating. All of us in Texas want to thank you for that.
Very much so.
Okay, 1872. Okay, and then, come on, I forgot the date. It was 1990, yes. Okay, there are 6 big breweries in Munich, right? Spaten, Augustiner, Paulaner, Löwenbräu, Hofbräuhaus, and where's the other one? Hofbräuhaus, Augustiner, Spaten, Löwenbräu, Paulaner, Jakobshof. 6. They had a monopoly of serving beer at the Oktoberfest. So they applied at the intellectual property office, whatever, for a trademark to have the word Oktoberfest trademarked just for them. Just for them. There was a long hassle over that. And I think they started litigation or something after the Second World War. And the final decision was handed down in 1990.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
1990.
That's pretty recent.
Since then, only these 6 breweries are legally allowed to call their beer Oktoberfest beer. No other Bavarian brewery can call it Oktoberfest beer. You guys aren't supposed to call it Oktoberfest beer, but the Bavarian laws don't apply to America, so we can do what we want.
Yeah.
Right? But you see, so Oktoberfest beer today is a legally protected trademark name reserved for only 6 breweries, 2 of which are now owned by Anheuser-Busch entirely, Spaten and Löwenbräu. 2 of them are owned half by Heineken, namely Paulaner and Jakob Schor. One is owned by the state of Bavaria, namely Hofbräuhaus, and only Augustiner is still a fully independent brewery.
Wow.
So the word Oktoberfest beer is a trademark. That's it. And basically, technically, an Oktoberfest beer is nothing but a well-aged Marzen beer.
Wow.
Did that straighten out the confusion?
Well,
Yes.
the only other thing
No.
is the at some point they brought this new beer in that's lighter that they call Festbier. That, I mean, when did the Marzen go to Fest? That's the thing.
Okay, here's the thing. Because they can't call it an Oktoberfest beer, you just drop the name October. And you call it Fest beer. And different breweries produce, and Fest just means feast. Different breweries produce Fest beers for different occasions. Some produce a Fest beer for Christmas, some for some locally important event like the city got its city charter, and that's a celebration. So, or they have rides and a midway and all that, and they produce, or Summerfest or Theater Fest or whatever. So there is no, let's say, brew technical definition of a Fest beer. It can be blonde, it can be dark, it can be as dark as a stout, and it can be as heavy as you wish. And it's consumed around Christmas and New Year's when it's bitter cold in Bavaria and elsewhere as well. So, and then other people brew it as pale, let's say, as a Maibock. You can do what you want. So that term can be used in many, many different ways. There is no clear definition. And if somebody tells you otherwise, they are trying to impress you without knowing what they're talking about.
Hey man, hold on. That I feel attacked by that.
Well, the thing that I hear that we've read about is that in the last 20 years or so, what the way the beer has changed is that the alcohol level has decreased. I guess because maybe they were having some issues with people possibly drinking too much beer at Oktoberfest, which I can't imagine.
No,
but
what?
Have you heard of this where the alcohol level has actually come down?
That is a general trend in Germany for other reasons, and that is you can either have beer limits or speed limits. There are no speed limits on the Autobahn.
Yeah.
So, which means when there is an accident, there may be fewer accidents on the Autobahn than here, but the ones that do occur are usually deadly because of the high speed. In other words, the Germans are absolutely vigorously against drunk driving.
Mm-hmm.
They have in their laws, they don't have the same sort of search and seize laws that protect us. In other words, you can't stop somebody for no cause. Right. In Germany, you can. If you suspect that the person has had alcohol, or they have situations where they stop everybody and everybody blows into a tube. So this is something every German, or if you drive in Germany, you know that. And they have a very centralized catalog system where you get points for malfeasance. And that is administered in a town south of the Danish border in Flensburg. It's the Traffic Sinner Archive. And so you accumulate points there and you can lose your license very easily. That is why Germans are scared of drunk driving. These laws are very vigorously enforced. That's why non-alcoholic beers, low alcohol beers, have become very, very popular in Germany. So that was the driver, as well as health concerns. Some people are into fitness and they think, if you get loaded, that's not good for you.
Right.
Yep. Makes sense.
That's big if true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I learned a lot of things about Oktoberfest that I did not know.
Yeah.
So that was a great history.
Todd, I want to throw him under the bus before we leave, Horst, because Todd has always told me, a Festbier is what they brew now, and that's always how it's been, and it's like a Helles. So what you're saying is a Festbier is...
No, that's not what I've said. I've
told me
said
that before.
What I've read is that
Marzen, yeah.
There's been 3 beers, and you talked about the first one, and the second one was Marzen. And just in the last 20 years, that these 6 breweries have started brewing what they are calling not a Marzen but a Festbier just during Oktoberfest.
And it has a slightly different alcohol content than the real Marzen. That is correct. You're accurate. They brew beers now specifically for the Oktoberfest, those 6 guys, and about 1/3 of the entire beer production for the entire year is sold at the Oktoberfest during those 2.5 weeks.
Wow, that's amazing.
Wow. So some people are drinking beer at that event then.
But actually, CM Becker, the company that I helped Todd run, we actually, the factory in Germany designed a high flow tap just for
Oktoberfest. And there's was it Paul? I don't remember which brewery. There's a video of Arnold Schwarzenegger using our tap to pour the first beer. And it's pretty cool. It'll fill a glass. And
I think it was Polaner that developed came to CM Becker and said, can you help us reduce these long lines? And we were able to produce a faucet or tap that could flow a liter of beer in less than 2 seconds.
Yeah. Wow. Through both flow control and just much, much larger size.
Yeah.
So, a typical beer faucet in the United States might sell for $15, and this one sells for...
It retails for about $500.
Yeah.
But there is a funny story if you about the Oktoberfest, the first cask that is being tapped. There was the mayor of the city of Munich about 6-7 decades ago was called, I think, Vogel. I forgot his first name. And he created what has since become a tradition. The mayor of Munich taps the first cask of beer at the Oktoberfest, and it's a wooden cask, a Barley opening. And you take that spout, and the trick is when you do that, you have to aim properly and give it a really good whack, because if you don't, the beer will squirt all over, and you basically take a shower in beer. And a Munich mayor who gets showered in beer at the Oktoberfest has much less of a chance of getting re-elected.
Beer abuse, man.
Yeah.
So I decided, and they have a big wooden mallet that they use to bang the tap into the bung, right? The belly bung. So I decided to call this democracy not by the ballot, but by the mallet.
So how do they decide which brewery's beer gets to be tapped as the first beer?
Oh, that's a good question.
To be honest with you, I do not know that.
Yeah, maybe they take turns or something. So,
or it's a secret.
I suspect that it might be Hofbräuhaus because that's the one that's owned by the state of Bavaria. So you can argue you're not favoring Anheuser-Busch versus Heineken. I don't know. I didn't think about that, so I never tried to learn that.
Yeah.
Well, they have restaurant chains here in the United States.
Yes, Hofbräuhaus. Yes,
right, indeed. Yeah, and they. What's interesting is we had one Pittsburgh. The one in Pittsburgh contacted me years ago, and they said that we just found out that you guys have authentic German-made taps, and our whole thing. And he explained the whole concept, and I love it. German beer, German food. German atmosphere. So they proceeded to replace all their taps with the C. M. Becker German V10 faucet. So that was something that I was introduced to that years ago, and still have yet to make it. If we ever get to Pittsburgh, we're going
once
there.
this virus is over, we're going to go visit and get a beer out of our taps.
There you
in
go.
Pittsburgh. Or they have more than one location.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to find one and get that would be a fun adventure, wouldn't it?
And we've talked about having Horst here at the ranch.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Someday we have to get you here. You'd have I think we'd have a good time.
Near Fort Worth, is that the airport?
Yeah, we're far away from everywhere, but it's about a 2.5 hour drive from either DFW or Austin. But we'll come pick you up. How about that?
Definitely. Yeah.
And by the way, talking about Homebrew House, there's also one in. It's across the river from Cincinnati. You are in Kentucky. I forgot what that is. It Newport or Newport, Kentucky, or something like that. There is also a Homebrew House.
Yep.
And there's one in Beijing if you ever get there.
And there's one in Chicago. We sell some parts too. They have the V10s in Chicago too.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah, that was a great show. It was a history lesson. I really enjoyed it.
You know, you captured our attention because this guy quit talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If people are listening, I'm gonna have to find a I'm gonna have to find a clip of me talking to put it on so people thought I had some input.
They're gonna think you were absent.
What I did was I changed the screen to Horst's face, and then I went and ran some errands. I got some emails done. No, actually, I was captivated.
Really good information.
Yeah, we were captivated. It was very good information. Thank you.
Well, if you ever want to do it again, let me know.
Well, yeah, you've already know what the next topic is.
Yeah.
I am dying to hear the story about how lager yeast was created from ale yeast. So maybe we could cover that sometime.
It has something to do with a microbial gypsy from Patagonia.
No, that's a fascinating story. I'm ready for that one.
Yeah, we're ready.
And the fish is this big.
Do that again.
We will, Horst, thank you so much for your time.
Breathing in the recesses, in the dark recesses of sexes. Heavy breathing in the dark recesses of the fermenter. In late Renaissance.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, every time he had said that's another story for another day, I took a note. I was like, that's another show he could do with it.
Definitely.
There's a running joke you might not be in on, Horst, but Todd and James have been looking to replace me. And so,
since the 200 episodes ago.
Yeah. Hey, wait. Wait a second. I'm not good at math. But anyways, Horst, my friend, thank you so much for your time doing this show again with us. We greatly appreciate you. And yeah, we will absolutely take you up on your offer. And anytime you want to come back on, you tell us and we'll make the time. So thank you, sir. And hope we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Okay. It was my pleasure. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can go to homebrewhappyhour.com and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page, or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. Thank you to our show sponsor, homebrewsupply.com, for supporting us and the homebrewing community. Go to homebrewsupply.com right now, use our promo code HHH, and you'll get 5% off your order. Also, all year long, Homebrew Supply is doing a 15th year anniversary special each month with a new deal every month. So go to homebrewsupply.com every month and check out the deals. On behalf of Todd Burns, James Carlson, and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thank you for listening.